Hello class, this is Michelle Long, Math 111. I'm your instructor for Math 111, Pre-Algebra Skills for College Success. And this is the second part of the Chapter 4 podcast. And the previous podcast was for section 4.5. This section is going to focus on 4.6, which is all about proportions and applications. So, if you can, if you have copies of your homework, what I would like you to do, if you can print them, I know a lot of you work directly online, but you can actually have this podcast on while you have the homework up, at the same time, and you can look at the homework. But what I want to do is I want to focus on Skill Builder 4.2, which is the second part of your homework. There are 3 assignments given to you, paper assignments. This is the second one, Skill Builder 4.2, which is the concept of proportions. And in this Skill Builder, you learn you have to write a proportion, and also the second part of it, you have to determine if an equation, which is basically 2 fractions with an equal sign between it, are proportional. Sometimes if you hear proportional, sometimes you'll hear the word equivalent, sometimes you'll hear the word equal. All of those 3 things are interchangeable, and basically what it means is that they're equal in value. Okay, so also what I would like you to do too is have your mini lecture 4.6 handy. This is also a continuation of proportion and applications. So you'll take a statement, which is written in basic English, and you translate that into a mathematical expression, and it just so happens that it would be translated into a proportion. The second part of it is a little bit of a continuation of Skill Builder 4.2 in terms of determining if an equation is proportional. So that's a little bit of some reinforcement of that material in 4.2. But the new part that we haven't learned yet is in 4.6 is finding the value of x in a proportion, or finding the missing piece, sometimes they'll say, in the proportion. So we're going to review all this material. Okay, so we'll start out with Skill Builder 4.2, which is the concept of proportions. And what it wants you to do is, on the top of the page, it actually has determining whether or not 2 fractions are proportional. And in order to determine that, you can see the equality test for fractions. So just go ahead and take a look at that and review that and read it over for a few seconds. And we're going to move on to the next slide now. What is a proportion? A proportion states that 2 ratios, or 2 fractions, because remember in the previous podcast we said a ratio can be a fraction, or 2 rates are equal or proportional. So basically what proportion means is equal. You can see the example there of miles over gallons equals miles over gallons. And also the weight, how the weight is exactly the same weight on each side, not one is greater than the other in terms of distribution. Okay, so here we have, which is very similar to the first part of your Skill Builder 4.2. It's asking us to write a proportion to express the following. If it takes 2 hours to drive 72 miles, then it will take 3 hours to drive 108 miles. Okay. So remember, with the rate, we include the units. So when we set up our proportion, we set up and make sure that our units are in there. The reason why we do that is because you can see how hours are in the numerator and miles are in the denominator, and I actually have that highlighted. And the reason why I have that highlighted is because you can see that they're directly across from one another. You don't want to have in your proportion your left fraction with miles in the denominator, and then on the right hand side the miles in the numerator. It would not come out to be proportional. So always make sure that your units are aligned. Okay. The second rate is it takes 3 hours to drive 108 miles. So we know that it is a proportion because basically it tells us it is, because there's an equal sign between the two fractions and there's no question mark or line through it, and without the question mark and the line through it, we know that what is on the left side equals what is on the right side. So 2 hours per every 72 miles and 3 hours per 108 miles, they are equivalent in value. Okay, so again, be careful to keep the units in the same position. If we are not told that a statement is a proportion, then how do we know? Okay, so going back to what a proportion states, it states that two ratios or two rates are equal in value. So to tell if something is proportion, we just need to see if the two fractions are equal. So in this case, we know it's been told to us in the word problem, and it's also written there, equal sign. If we don't know, let's say the word problem says you need to find out whether or not these two fractions are proportional. That's fine, we can. What we want to do is write down this rule, because the equality test for fractions means where you see A over B equals C over D. If you see where the red arrows are, notice the red arrows together symbolize a cross. Or an X, I guess you would say. It's more like an X than a cross, but what they do is they call it a cross product. It's like living across the street from your neighbor. A is the neighbor of D, C is the neighbor of B. And as long as we're not talking about zeros, we don't want to put zeros anywhere in this equation, we're talking about whole numbers. So if we take A and we multiply that by D, that needs to equal C multiplied by B. If it does not equal in value, if A times D does not equal B times C, then they're not equivalent, and the equality test does not check out. Okay, so to tell if two fractions are equal, we look at their cross products to see if they're equal. In the next slide, there are two examples. The two examples are two equations, and what we want to do is we want to find out if they are proportional. So notice what it's asking us. It's asking us to determine if the following equations are proportions, and it's not telling us that they're proportion. The other indication is that there is a question mark above the equal sign. That's an indication that we don't know that it's proportional. We don't know if 10 over 18 is equal to 25 over 45. We have no idea. So what we have to do is we have to use that equality test that we just saw in the previous slide. We have to take that next step, and we have to find the cross product. So notice that the arrows that are on top of each other are pointing to the cross products. So the cross products, the first cross products in this equation is 10 times 45. The second cross products are 18 times 25. Okay, let's go ahead and do the multiplication. It's pretty simple multiplication. 10 times 45 is 45, add a 0 to it. 18 times 25 is 450. They both equal 450. Therefore, yes, they are equivalent. So you want to rewrite the equation without the question mark on top of the equal sign. And you just want to rewrite it as, yes, I do want to say 10 over 18 does equal 25 over 45. This is a proportion. Now, there are going to be some cases where it does not equal, that it's not proportional, and that's fine. So we're going to look at this next example, B. 42 over 100 is or is not equal to 22 over 25. Let's go ahead and multiply the cross products. 42 times 55 is 2,310. Let's look at the second cross products. 22 times 100, well, you just take the 22 and add two zeros at the end whenever you're multiplying by a power of 10. That gives us 2,200. 2,200, right off the bat there, you can see, does not equal 2,310. So if we rewrite this as no, it is not equivalent, we can rewrite it as, you just say no, Or you can do 42 over 100 is not equivalent to, which is an equal sign with a cross or a line through it saying no, not equal, 22 over 55. Okay, so that kind of sums up your examples and exercise questions in Skill Builder 4.2, which is concept of proportion. So that should help you with those questions on that exercise. Now let's go ahead and open up the mini lecture 4.6, and this is proportions and also applications. So the mini lecture 4.6 is talking about writing proportions and determining whether or not two fractions are proportional. And there's also a missing piece in there as well in the proportion that we're going to talk about. Okay, so basically, if there is a number missing in a proportion, so far what we've learned that a proportion is given to us and we have to just set it up. And it's equal, so we know it's proportion. And then we've also been given the proportion where we have a numerator and denominator on both sides and both rates. We just have to determine if they're equal. In this case, it's a little bit more complex because one of the numerators or one of the denominators is missing. So what you want to do to solve for the missing number is you first, of course and foremost, you want to find the cross products. And we did that in the previous slide, so you should know how to do that by now, easily enough. And then what you want to do is kind of like think about equations and how we've learned about equations a few weeks ago. Use that background that you've learned about equations. We're going to apply that to this here in order to find that missing number. After you've divided each side of the equation by the number, multiplied by n. They use n here, but of course my example uses x. And basically what n means is could be any variable. A, B, C, x, y, z, n, m. It doesn't matter what the variable is. They're just using n as an example. Okay, so after you've worked out the equation, you want to simplify the result. So basically what that means is you want to find what x is, what n is, what y is. We want to find the answer. Then what we can do, now this is optional, not a lot of times you have time to do this on a test, but I strongly recommend that you do this, is you go back and you check your answer. So what you do is you take the answer, you did all that work to find x, which is 10.5. So go back and replace the x in the original problem with 10.5, then find your cross products. They don't do that in this here. What they do is they work it out, but they don't do check your answer. So please make sure you memorize these steps in finding the missing number in a proportion. Okay? All right, here are two examples. There's A and there's B. The first example is 24 is over something, and they designate that as the variable n because it's an unknown. We don't know what that denominator is. But whatever the case may be, that fraction is supposed to equal 3.7. We just don't know what the denominator is. So what we're going to do is we're going to, in our notes, we're going to follow the steps that we need to find in order to solve for a missing number in a proportion. And the first thing that, remember what we learned was find the cross products. Easily enough. We know how to do that because we found cross products before. And also, a quick note too is that we do know that this is a proportion because notice there is an equal sign between 24 over n and 3 over 7 because there's no line through it and there's no question mark above it or below it. So we do know that that is a fraction. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so finding the cross products. Okay, easy enough. We can do our circles, we can do our arrows, whichever way you'd like to do them when you start out. 24 times 7, and then that's on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and then n times 3. All right, great. Now we have some multiplying to do in order to solve this. Since we have a missing piece here in this expression, it does make it an equation. Anytime that you have an equal sign in an expression, it makes it an equation. Because if you think about EQUA is the first 4 letters of equation, EQUA is the first letters of the word equal. You can't have an equation without an equal sign. All right, so let's do the multiplication. 24 times 7, easily enough, right? Get our calculator. We know it's 168. Great, we're done that side of the equation. Now on the other side, we can times 3 times n, but we can't multiply them because we don't know what n is. Our whole goal is to find out what it is. So we're going to use our equation concept and how we learned the division principle of equality and apply that here. So 3n is actually, no, I'm sorry, n times 3 is actually 3n. Remember the division principle of equality that says that we have to divide both sides by the number that is being multiplied by the variable. In this case, the number that's being multiplied by the variable is 3. We divide both sides by 3. We do not divide both sides by 168, and I do see sometimes students do get that confused. Again, division principle of equality, make sure you memorize that. You divide both sides of the equation, which is the left side and the right side. You divide both sides by the number that's being multiplied by the variable. In this case, it's 3. When we do n times 3, which is actually 3n, and we put that over 3, the 3's cancel out because 3 divided by itself is 1. That leaves us with n. On the other side, we get our calculators and we can say, okay, 168 divided by 3, evenly, it goes in 56 times. Great, we got our answer. Okay, so on a test, if you don't have a lot of time left, you're probably going to move on to the next question, but if you do have a lot of time, you can do the last part of the rule, which is check your answer. So we can go ahead. We did all that work to find the variable. In the original expression, 24 over n equals 3 over 7, we found n. So let's go ahead and put 56 in there. We're going to remove n, and we're going to put 56 in. And you can see on the right side there, moving over to the right a little bit on the top, that's what they did. They put 24 over 56 and they said that equals 3 over 7. But we do know that, right? Because there's an equal sign. However, we're not 110% sure. So we're going to be 110% sure by checking it. We're going to take 24, we're going to multiply that by 7. That comes out to 168. We're going to take the 3 and multiply that by 56. That comes out to be 168. If 168 equal 168, then our answer is absolutely 100% correct, and it is. N does equal 56. We're going to apply that same theory to B. N happens to be in the right-hand side in the denominator, rather than the left-hand side is in the right-hand side now in the denominator. That's the missing part that we have to find. We're going to follow the same steps. Find our cross products. So on the left-hand side, it'll be 176 times n. On the right-hand side, it'll be 286 times 4, and they actually went a step ahead and just multiplied that. 286 times 4 is 1,144. Okay, so 176n. Remember the division principle of equality. It says you have to divide both sides of the equation by the number that's being multiplied by the variable. The number in this case that's being multiplied by the variable is 176. We need to get rid of that number because we want to isolate the n. That is our ultimate goal when we're working with equations, is to isolate the variable, the number one goal. Okay, so 176 divided by 176 is actually 1. Comes out to be 1n. You do not have to put the 1 in front of the n because it's automatically assumed. The right-hand side. Divide 1,144 divided by 176. That comes out to be 6.5. So it does not come out evenly. It comes out to be 6.5 as a decimal, but that's perfectly fine because we can still check it even if it's in a decimal format and we will still get the same answer. Okay, so we're 100% sure it's correct. We're just not 110% sure. So let's go ahead and move to checking the answer. So go ahead and check it. You don't have to. It's optional, but it's a good idea to do it. Let's get in the habit of doing it. So we can stop here and be like, okay, we're done. But just to be 110% sure, let's go ahead and check it. So again, we're going to take that 6.5. We're going to replace n. You can see if you move up to the right a little bit, they rewrote that expression, 176 over 4 equal 286 over 6.5. Found the cross products, both of them equal 1,144. Yes, it is absolutely correct. Okay, so here we have another example in finding a proportion. And we know that Cindy's car traveled 234 miles on 9 gallons of gas. Okay, we do know that. That's the information that's given to us. What it wants us to know, to find out, is how many gallons of gas will Cindy need to take a 312-mile trip? All right, so when we go ahead and we set up our rate, let's just take into consideration the information that we do know. When we set up our rate, remember, miles and gallons have to be aligned. Miles has to be in the numerator, miles has to be in the numerator, gallons has to be in the denominator, gallons has to be in the denominator. So, what we do know is that 234 miles is traveled on 9 gallons of gas. So we'll set up that fraction, or that rate, which is 234 over 9. We wrote that down. We know how to do the rate for that. 312 miles, she needs to go on another trip that she's actually going further. So she's going to use her last trip as kind of an example of about how many gallons she's going to need. Because it's a little bit less than 100 more miles, but she definitely knows how many gallons she took in her last trip and how many miles, so she's going to use that as kind of like a guide. All right, so we do not know how many gallons, so that's what she wants to find out in order to budget her money or in order to get gas before she leaves on her trip. So let's go ahead and set up our proportion. Our proportion is set up, and 234 miles is actually on the left-hand side in the numerator. 9 gallons is in the denominator, because remember, units have to be aligned and units have to be stated. It's good to get in the habit of doing that so you make sure that your units are aligned. On the right-hand side of the equal sign, we know that that she's going to go 312 miles. So she knows how many miles she's going to travel on her trip. She doesn't know how many gallons. Anytime that there's an unknown anywhere, you can always designate that as a variable. In this case, they chose n. We're going to put that as the denominator. Okay, great. So we have basically a missing piece in our proportion that we have to find. We're going to think about the rules that we learned on how to find that, the steps. First step is find the cross product. So we can ignore the units for now and just focus on the numbers. On the left-hand side, we're going to have 234, we're going to times that by n, that comes out to be 234n, easily enough. On the right-hand side, we're going to multiply 312 by 9, that comes out to be 2,808. Okay, so we have our equation. We need to use the division principle of equality in order to solve this equation, and we need to divide both sides by 234. Let's see. 234 divides evenly by 234. That leaves us with 1n or n. But on the right side, we need to see how many times 234 goes into 2,808. Well, after we do the division, we realize that it goes in evenly, and it goes in 12 times. So if we look back in our word problem, and we look to see what it is that we were told to find, we needed to see how many gallons of gas Cindy was going to need to take a 312-mile trip. Well, we know, because we just worked it out, that she needs 12 gallons of gas. Now, they didn't do the check here, but you can do the check by going back and replacing the n gallons with 12 and then doing your cross products. And you'll see that both sides add up, multiply to be the same amount, so it is correct. And I know for sure that 12 is correct, so she's going to need 12 gallons of gas. Okay, the end. Any questions about these two exercises? Hopefully this should help you a little bit more than just having nothing to assist you. I think as we move further into this term, we're going to be working with more complex mathematical subjects. So podcasts will be very helpful for you in terms of helping you with your homework. Again, any questions, email me at mlong@pit.edu.